Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're a focused learner gearing up for the UGC NET exam, you already know that Geoffrey Chaucer is an absolute heavyweight on the syllabus. But let's be totally honest with ourselves here. He's also one of the most intimidating figures to study. Well, today we're going to completely change how you look at this medieval master. We are going to break down the foundations of Chaucer for your literary exams, and we're organizing the whole thing into a highly structured, visual format that just cuts right through the noise. Get ready to master the essentials without the usual headache. Okay, let's dive into this, because I know exactly what happens when you open your study materials to the Chaucer chapter. You see those wild Middle English spellings, all those extra E's just mysteriously tacked onto the end of words, the totally unfamiliar vowels, the extra consonants, and boom, the panic sets in. But you know what? That dread isn't actually about the literary concepts. It's almost entirely about that language barrier. It makes us assume that, well, if the words are this hard to literally just read, the ideas must be incredibly difficult to grasp too. Here is the massive myth going around that to pass the UGC NET, you need to be able to fluently translate every single word of Middle English. The reality? You absolutely do not. No way. When we strip away all that intimidating spelling, Chaucer's core contributions actually boil down to a very short, highly learnable list of concepts. Multiple choice exams like the UGC NET are really designed to assess your structural and thematic knowledge, not your on-the-fly translation skills. So, here's our roadmap for today. Number 1, we'll look at form, covering language and the frame narrative. Number 2, content, focusing on estates and meter. 3, character, examining realism and irony. And 4, we'll wrap it all up with the final checklist. All right, let's jump right into section 1, form. Specifically, language and the frame narrative. Okay, so we've all heard Chaucer called the father of English poetry, right? But here's the thing. The exam doesn't just care that he has this title, it tests why this label even exists. You see, during Chaucer's time, Latin was the strict language of the church, and French was the language of the royal court and the educated classes. Those were considered the only true literary languages. So by choosing to write his major works in Middle English, Chaucer did something totally revolutionary. He legitimized English as a language entirely capable of serious, complex literary work at a time when that was not assumed at all. That right there is the key takeaway examiners are looking for. Moving on, another huge pillar of his form is the frame narrative. The Canterbury Tales isn't just one long, linear story. It's a story within a story. A group of pilgrims are traveling to Canterbury, and they agree to tell tales to pass the time. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is that this structure is one of the most heavily tested elements on the exam. Why? Because the tale a pilgrim tells perfectly reflects their own unique personality. Take the miller, for example. He's drunk, he's rowdy, so what does he do? He interrupts the refined host to tell this deliberately crude bawdy tale that matches his unruly nature to a T. Knowing this overarching frame device and being able to match a tale's tone to its teller is absolutely vital for you. Moving right along, let's hit section 2, content. We're talking estates and meter. So, Chaucer's pilgrims. They represent a complete cross-section of medieval society, which back then was divided into 3 main estates: the nobility, the clergy, and the commoners. In the general prologue, Chaucer uses each character to sort of poke fun at or satirize their specific social class. The UGC NET absolutely loves testing estates satire because it forms a really concrete, identifiable pattern for them to ask about. For instance, you might see the corrupt partner who sells fake relics, or the monk who prefers hunting over actually praying. Those are classic test examples of Chaucer's satirizing the clergy estate. You definitely need to be prepared to identify exactly which estate is being mocked just based on a character's description. Now, next up in our content bucket is meter and rhyme. Chaucer's credited with really popularizing iambic pentameter in English verse, and he famously used rhymed couplets, which, later became known as heroic couplets, as a major structural device in the tales. I want to give you a quick heads up here. These are highly testable technical facts. You might be asked to identify the meter or the rhyme scheme directly on the exam, and that means you must be able to state iambic pentameter and heroic couplet without a second of hesitation. Seriously, don't just rely on vaguely recognizing them if they pop up in a multiple choice option. Commit these terms to memory for sure. All right, that brings us to section 3, character. We're going to dive into realism and irony. Before Chaucer came along, honestly, a lot of medieval literature leaned heavily on flat, symbolic characters. They were essentially just two-dimensional stand-ins for virtues or vices. But Chaucer's pilgrims, they are drawn with incredible realism and individual, sometimes highly contradictory, traits. The wife of Bath is the absolute best example of this complexity. I mean, she is fiercely independent, boldly defending her own experience over strict religious authority, and she famously outlives 5 husbands. When questions pop up in this area, they're testing why a character is considered realistic. The correct answer is usually grounded in these specific, human contradictions and memorable details, rather than just some general vague impression. And this brilliantly illustrates our final analytical concept, irony. You see, Chaucer loved to play this game where he presents a character's own self-description at face value, but then he lets their actual behavior or the tale they choose to tell completely undercut what they literally just said. Both dramatic and verbal irony are common, highly testable devices across his work. On the exam, this usually shows up as questions asking you to identify the gap. You've got to spot that stark difference between how a character presents themselves verbally and what their actions or chosen tales actually reveal about who they truly are. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, the final checklist for mastering Chaucer. Guys, this list right here is genuinely the core of what the NET has tested on Chaucer across years and years of past papers. Number 1, why he is the father of English poetry. 2, the frame narrative structure. 3, estate satire. 4, iambic pentameter and the heroic couplet. 5, realism and character individuality. And 6, irony, specifically that gap between self-presentation and action. Do you notice something amazing here? You just mastered the most tested concepts of his entire body of work, and it didn't require you to translate a single line of Middle English. So the next time Geoffrey Chaucer pops up on your study schedule, I want you to remember this explainer. You are no longer opening a chapter that you have to dread. Instead, you're simply checking off 6 clear, structural ideas that you already understand perfectly. Keep this framework in your back pocket, and you will absolutely crush these questions on the exam. As you open your books tonight, ask yourself this. Which of Chaucer's pilgrims is hiding the most ironic secret between their words and their actions? Dive in and find out.